It is January 8th, 2016, and I am in Budapest, Hungary. Now, the mass sexual attacks that took place during the New Year celebration in Cologne, in Germany, have left a widespread sense of unease here in Europe. There was an initial attempt by the German authorities to downplay the situation, but that effort backfired, and the facts are now known and are becoming those aspects of what happened that are not yet known are being clarified, and there's a lot of scrutiny taking place. So this one will not be left under the carpet. The events in Cologne, I mean, we're talking about an attack apparently coordinated in advance by up to 1,000 migrant men operating in groups of between 20 and 30, surrounding individual women or women in small groups, manhandling those women, ripping off their clothes, touching their private parts with bare hands, raping them, robbing them. I mean, that this would happen in Europe is quite shocking. But the thing is, it turns out that it didn't just happen in Cologne. You know, in Cologne, the incident was it's a lot. First of all, the incident was reported only late, so we didn't know about this immediately. And then it was downplayed, and now it turns out to have been larger than that was initially indicated. It involves 120 criminal complaints for assault, battery, robbery, rape. And then it now turns out that it didn't just happen in Cologne, but it happened in other cities in Germany. But wait, it gets worse. Because it didn't just happen in Germany, it also happened in Helsinki, Finland, it happened in Sweden, it happened in Austria, it happened in just about every city where you have these migrants. And these were mob attacks. I mean, you can't just say, well, it was just one or two people, or it's there's always a rotten apple in the bunch. I mean, there's always there's rapists, or you got to be careful because there can always be a rapist. And these were mob attacks. These were many men acting in concert. This was not the rapist who's lurking in the corners. I mean, this was done openly in public. Men egging each other on to use European women for their entertainment. And then there was an attempt by the authorities to sweep it under the rug, which blew back in their faces, and they did not get away with what they did in Rotherham, which is to sweep under the rug the inconvenient fact that about 1,000 400 white children and teenagers from underprivileged backgrounds in that region of the UK alone had been subject to rape and abuse by the so-called Muslim grooming gangs. So this is a very, very big problem, and as the demographic transformation of Europe continues at a very fast pace, this is the type of hell that we can expect will become our daily lives throughout the continent. This is in fact the way things are in the Middle East. That is just the culture down there. During the Arab Spring, these things happen all the time during the mass demonstrations. And there were incidents of in Cairo of an American journalist being assaulted in this way that I guess brought this type of cultural peculiarity to the attention of the world. But this is just how things are in the Middle East, and this is how things are in North Africa in particular. Now, why? Well, you can blame the individual personalities of the men who comprise these societies. And, to a certain extent that's fair. But there's also the issue of the Quran and what it says. The Quran, in one of its most famous exhortations, unambiguously instructs the followers of Islam to slay the non-believers. That is just a literal statement in the Quran. You can read it yourself if you don't believe me. But there's also another form of terrorism that the Quran advocates, and that terrorism is sexual terrorism. There is the statement in the Quran that says that you, as a Muslim, are entitled to take non-Muslim women as your sex slaves. That is, again, just another statement in the Quran. And Muhammad, as a matter of fact, historically, he was a warrior. He slayed a lot of non-believers. He took non-Muslim women as sex slaves, had multiple wives, including, as a matter of fact, a 9-year-old girl. That's just historical. Now, the attacks of Paris, the attacks of the massacres of Charlie Hebdo, and other incidents of that type that have bewildered that unfortunate country, France, in 2015, they are, one form of terrorism. They're the terrorism by the sword. But the other terrorism that is advocated by the Quran, by Muslims, is sexual terrorism. And for Europeans, that type of terrorism poses a dilemma. And this is the dilemma. The dilemma is that because of the policies of Angela Merkel and the enablers of Islam among the liberal left, Europe is becoming repopulated by these migrants by these Muslims. And the practices of the Middle East are becoming increasingly felt in Europe. The practices of the Middle East and of Africa, as Africa and the Middle East continues to empty itself out into Europe. Now, that is a very, very big problem, because you have in Europe individuals such as myself, for example, who regard the mistreatment of women with a fury that is quite deep. If, using myself as an example, you are the type of person who says that it is okay for my daughter or my wife or my girlfriend or my mother to be sexually molested, to have strange men, groups of strange men, feeling her private parts under her garments because she is going to the train station, for example, without being accompanied by a male relative and without wearing a burqa, then if you're that type of person who believes that or who enables that type of belief, you are my enemy. And you are my enemy unto death. And moreover, if you are the type of person who, happens to have a relative, a female relative, who goes to a train station and suffers that type of behavior at the hands of groups of roving men, then I have such an intense sympathy for you that the same position that I would have for my own kin and for my own relations, I have towards your kin and towards your relations. And he who would injure or disrespect your woman, the woman in your life, your mother, your wife, your daughter, or whoever it may be, is my enemy. And my mortal enemy, my enemy unto death. Now, we in Europe, we live in a society of laws. And it is the responsibility of the state to restrict this sense of lawlessness that I feel, and to apply the law when the law is broken. But the problem when you're dealing with millions of people coming over and policy prescriptions such as that of Angela Merkel, who says that she's only going to deport people once they're convicted, right, according to what German law currently says. And when millions of these guys, additional of these guys, are coming over every year, then, the system faces a collapse. And the sense of justice that I crave for is not being met and is not being satisfied. So Angela Merkel and other political leaders in Europe need to get their act together, and they need to get their act together quickly before the situation escalates out of control. Take care, guys.